You have a list of different periodicities, right? And so what are you graphing?
I start from 1 billion years and I go up sort of like 0.1% per time, right?
I'm not sure what you mean by you go up by 0.1%.
I start with 1 billion. I keep changing it by a tiny bit. And then I see if that was the cycle of the universe, how well would that fit
the pattern
of ones that are observed?
I get it. So basically you have a pattern of observed distances and you're like, if the fundamental harmonic is 1 billion years, then how does it align with the pattern that's measured? And what you do is you continuously increase this harmonic
see how it fits.
And you set it upwards, and eventually when you get to 1.4 times 10 to the 23, that is the harmonic that appears to fit perfectly with the observed cycles.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of interesting things that come out of that. Dewey had a lot of those, the table of ones that were proportions of 2 and 3, right? And I had added to that the ones that were divided by 7 and multiplied by 5. I'd included a lot of those ones in. And it gets all those. But one of the fascinating things is one of the cycles that had not been put in is there's a cycle in the Canadian lynx of 9.6 years. And there's a bunch of things that are found to have either 9.6 or 9 2/3 year cycles. So let's take the average of those and call it 9.63 years. It comes out and says there should be a strong cycle at 9.638 years. So it says that cycle should be there. Now, that's a confirmation that what's being done isn't some sort of silly thing, and it's finding something that's real that does correspond to the universe we're in.
So given that it is real, right? So there's, I think that it's a difficult thing to accept as real, but I think that for the sake of discussion, like assuming that it is. Yeah. How can we, my instrumental mind immediately goes to like, how can I use this to my advantage?
Yeah.
How can I use this to my advantage, Ray?
Well,
even in terms of understanding, just understanding the universe.
Money.
After I worked that out, I wanted to buy a new house, right? Mm. And there's a cycle. You don't need to know all of that. You just need to know there's a cycle of 7 point something years, and the cycle of in the house prices. It's different in America. It's 18 years. You get that, and you look at what they're doing, and you say, "There's a good time to buy." Apparently, there's the two families, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. One of them used the 40-month cycle since the 1800s, right? And the other one used the 18-year cycle in real estate since the 1930s, when the Empire State Building was built using the cheapest possible labor. And those families got rich using cycles. So that's how you do it.
Interesting. Okay.
I have a really far out question that I want to ask for my friend Doug. Can you make a marker for this? Because I want to send this to Doug. This is really interesting. Do you think, so if matter, if atoms are just one frequency, one standing wave of this universally pervading material, this fiber of existence, are there other frequencies of experience? Is it possible that there's structures we can't see because they're overtone structures, and that there's whole levels of conscious? I mean, this is just getting into the
Doug, we love you.
Complete weeds, but I want to hear your thoughts on that idea.
Oh, okay. The other people that I talked to recently were Laura Lee. Do you know Laura Lee? Mm-mm. Oh, okay. What's their institute called? It's got a funny name. I can't remember it. Anyway, we went into that because you were more on the scientific side and they were more on the meditation and other side. Yes, I do think so. When you do all of this, I've talked about the speed of light of all these waves. But when we have an atom, most of the mass is in the nucleus. But if they bump against each other, it's a much more spongy thing, which the electrons and stuff consider to bang against each other. I call it the atom wave.
The shell, maybe? Electrons. I don't know. The shell of the atom?
They bump each other. So the speed of sound is those waves bumping together, but because the inertia is coming from the nucleus, but the sponginess is coming from that. If you bang a bunch of neutrons and protons together, a wave will travel at the speed of light. But with these, it travels much slower. Now, in the harmonics theory, you've got both the frequency and the distances show this harmonic structure. So if there's these sort of ratio 34, 5, 60 and near powers of that, will that show up as velocity also because it's distance over time? And the answer is yes, it does. When you do that, the speed of sound, if you divide the speed of light by that number, you get about 8 kilometers per second. That's very typical of the speed of sound in solid materials, right? If you divide it again, you get, I'm not going to do these calculations in my head, but you get a bunch of other ones. Each time you divide it, the second time you get the speed of heat. Now, we don't normally talk about the speed of heat. It's also the speed of nerve impulses. One of the speeds of nerve impulses, there's multiple of them. If you divide it again...
Because the speed of heat is pretty specific for substance, as is...
It varies widely, yeah. So if you take lots of them, in any of these areas, like if I take the speed of sound in lots of different materials and I analyze it by what I call Kotoff's method, it's looking for values that are fractions or multiples of the other values. And when I do that, I get a couple of specific values out for sound that do have the sort of ratios you expect in harmonics theory. You get the same. You can do the same thing with heat, but heat, it's got a wider range. Then you get the next one is the typical speed of ocean currents. The next one gives you the typical speed of continental drift. So we're now down to a centimetre per year, right? And those things are at those ratios. And if you have a look at them, you've got the old elements that they had in ancient times: earth, continental drift, water, ocean currents, fire and air and fire, and ether. You get these 5 levels, and they show up. And if you make a diagram, I've got one that I put 5 lines horizontally corresponding to those velocities, and along the top I put the distance scale of all these structures in the universe, and then I run diagonals. I make it into triangles of 60 degrees. And one of those sets of lines gives you period, and one gives you distance. And that way it gives you velocity. And the 3 are obviously related. There's only 2 dimensions. And when you do that and start to do things like, for example, Jupiter goes around the sun in 11.86 years. Now, 11.86 light years happens to be one of the distance quanta that you find amongst the stars. There's multiple of them, 4.44, Dewey's 4.44. It actually comes out at 4.43, so it agrees very well that the stars like to be that far apart. So then when you do that with Jupiter, but Jupiter's doing that period around the sun. So it's moving at sound velocity. It works out when you work out its velocity. It's a typical sound velocity one. So it falls on that second line down. And you can find these connections. And these connections, I call it the universe wide web, because each connection, you've either got a common period or a common wavelength. If either of those is in common, the things can interact, right? Because the particles at the nodes of the things are interacting if they're in the same places. If they've got the same period, they can interact. So you can see methods of interaction that aren't normally recognized with the structure.
So doesn't that imply that, okay, so if you have a universal harmonic breakdown, that everything comes from the single harmonic that's at 1.4 times 10 to the 23 light years, then
yes, yeah.
Could you have a parallel one that's happening in the background?
Different? Yeah, you could, but where I was heading with that is those ones, they're, yeah, okay. I do Vipassana meditation. One of the things that happens when you do that, you start observing your breath. You shouldn't try to do this. These are not instructions. You should go on a Vipassana meditation course if anyone wants to do it. Then what happens is you spend a lot of time observing sensations throughout the body. After you observe them a lot, various energetic knots and things exist, and they dissolve if you do it right, which is to observe them with equanimity. Not wanting it to change, not wanting it to not change or anything. And these things begin to dissolve, and you begin to become aware of finer and finer, what do you call them? You can call them realms. Some people call them realms. finer realms.
Overtones of experience.
Yeah, they are. These are the realms that in Buddhism they describe as the human realm. There's 5 more realms below us, and there's 31 altogether. And so there's where the different devas and the what are the next ones up from devas? The Brahma,
don't know.
Brahmas,
higher powers. Yeah, I don't know. Higher spirits.
Yeah, and that changes. These things get finer and finer, but there's one point where it actually changes its nature as well. They call them fine material and something else planes. You can experience
the immaterial world, the fine material world, and the sensuous world.
Yeah, that's right.